Oh, hey, it's you. Welcome to the Black Pill. Let's talk about social contagion. It's in the news. Brown University. Um, we'll get there. Of course, more people are LGBTQIA plus now. Of course they are. Uh, a thing I don't have time to write, much less record. But we have to do this. Various articles state 40% of applicants to Brown University identify as LGBTQ plus, double the figure from 13 years ago. And the term social contagion gets tossed around fairly casually. I mean, if I have time, I don't. I could put a sampling of news headlines over here. Uh, if I don't have time for that, I'm probably just uploading this raw at this moment in life. But go Google Brown University LGBTQ and just look at how many uh, social contagion headlines you get. Contagion is a disease term. If I say contagion, your limbic system takes notice. A threat, something disgusting, a foreign entity, moral panic. I don't suspect that is entirely an accident. Lisa Littman uses the term in her 2018 paper, which I definitely should link, in which she invents the term rapid onset gender dysphoria, ROGD. She's attempting to explain why parents on the internet say their teenagers suddenly identify as trans, despite having shown no signs of this before. Littman seems to conclude the reason is peer pressure. She surveys the parents, not the children, and finds the more LGBT friends they have, the more likely they are to identify as LGBT. This is the rainbow is a communicable disease, and it's just now occurred to me. I wrote this a couple days ago. It's just now occurred to me that this is a very similar tactic to damn, this is why I write stuff down. The autism and vaccines guy, Andrew Wakefield, the Wakefield study, uh, where the study in question, none of the children are diagnosed with autism before they come into his office, and he doesn't find a connection between autism and vaccines. He finds that like 7 out of thousands and thousands of parents he interviewed are willing to say that their kid got a vaccine and now they have all these health problems, and those things are connected. Lidman similarly is not talking to or diagnosing any teenagers. She's taking parents' word for it, and this is very, very, very deceptive, consciously or otherwise. Whether to smear a whole demographic of people with a disease term, or grabbing that term inconsiderately and never imagining those people are not an infectious disease, the word stuck. To be clearer, language that activates the fear center of your brain aimed at vulnerable minorities is a tactic as old as written language. When the Rwandan government, dominated by Hutus, wanted to do a genocide on the Tutsi population, they riled up the citizens every day on Radio Television de Mille Collines, describing Tutsis as cockroaches and joked about crushing them underfoot. When the Nazis wanted to murder their Jewish citizens, they referred to them as vermin and so forth. In this light, whatever one's intention, use of language like social contagion must be not only carefully considered but rejected. LGBTQ plus folks are vulnerable minorities, minoritized and marginalized people, victims of murder and suicide at much higher rates than the general population. Later studies, linky do, debunk the idea pretty much from start to finish. There just isn't an increase in trans identity over the given period. I don't think it's cut and dried. I think it's cut and dried. Like, simplicity is for fascists. If people are trying to convince you a thing is just that simple, you know, oversimplifying and dismissing ideas is it's not a good tactic. First, though, let's do away with the term contagion. It's provocative. It's provocative. But culture always travels. That's true. It transmits. We change each other. Groups learn from each other. And sexual expression and identity are always deep rooted in culture. The Spartans notoriously used boys for pleasure and women for procreation. A small group of modern Chinese people have open marriages with women taking several husbands. Samoans have reportedly four genders, and some words here that I don't know how to begin to say, so I'm going to leave off here. Nature's hardly in it. Nature's hardly in that. More, when we look at sex differences, they often resolve down to gender differences, especially in behavior. Men and women are naturally equally promiscuous, despite a century of literature to the contrary. But many societies try to limit female promiscuity while celebrating male promiscuity. We've known for decades that women in America are more flexible in their sexual expression. We've also known men are more likely to be punished for any expression except the most compliant with expectations. Hegemonic masculinity. Like now, pop culture says toxic masculinity, but in gender studies 20 years ago, the word was hegemonic masculinity. The hegemony is when one culture or one power dominates everything else and homogenizes it. Those things aren't to do with nature. Math ability was touted not that long ago as a sex difference. Parietal lobe synaptic density and math scores both favored males by about 1%. But we changed our educational practices so that males weren't called on disproportionately in math classes. Females had equal opportunity. And both the bio and the performance differences have totally evaporated. America's pretty authoritarian on one hand and less authoritarian than ever on the other. I remember reading about a gay man in the 1960s who had no other examples of gay men because it was just not talked about, or only talked about in horrifying terms. He only had heteronormative narratives, and so he felt alone and isolated and even alienated. He doubted his own identity. Then as people started to come out publicly and pride parades blossomed, he knew he was not alone. I can write these words on the page, I can say them to you in the screen, and I just can't convey what he was trying to say because I don't have the experience he had of that total isolation and then suddenly emerging into society along with other people like him. Culture had gaslighted him his entire life, and then suddenly he had a place, a community. God, I wish I could remember his name and direct you to his writing so you could read it directly from him. And this is what the American authoritarian right is really afraid of. When Ahmadinejad said there were no gay people in Iran, he was right. There were homosexuals, but no culture of living openly with freedom and community and pride. No gay identity because they imprison or murder their homosexual citizens. When you stop enforcing hegemonic expectations, people stop conforming to those expectations. It's not rocket science. It isn't natural for humans to be strictly monogamous and rigidly heterosexual. It isn't natural. Sex serves all sorts of functions other than procreation, bonding, relationship maintenance, relieving boredom, making life fun, and people have always experienced themselves in ways divergent from culture, while culture has usually tried to put people in boxes to make the majority more comfortable. More people identify publicly as LGBTQIA+, and the plus itself is ever expanding. Intersexed and asexual, the plus 10 years ago, have moved into the main acronym as more people understand themselves in those terms, and those terms are more concretely defined. The plus includes identities that exist but aren't always labeled or aren't really common. I'm a little bit neuroqueer, for example. Because of my disability, I can never be masculine enough for you in the ways that you might desire. And I can see how arbitrary and limiting is the hegemonic masculinity, so I don't care to try. When 40% of the class identify as LGBTQ plus, are they contaminated? Are they faking it for social gain? Well, the first is a smear and the second is debunked. Like, for the social contagion idea to work in the first place, there'd have to be positives to a trans identity, and we still, as a culture, deeply revile and reject and ostracize and hate and fucking murder trans people. So, I mean, it just doesn't work even at that level, even if it worked in the math, which it doesn't. And is it a problem for 40% of a class to identify as LGBT? Why are we so agitated about it? Why does it make headlines? Why do you click on the articles? Well, because the right is losing the culture war. That's why. The people who claim to be about liberty want to control your gender expression and your sexuality. And if that doesn't sound threatening, it's likely because you've internalized their standards in childhood. It isn't freedom to have to do what you already want to do. Try to imagine, if it isn't too threatening, wanting to do something that the American political right doesn't want you to do. Now you see the threat to democracy, freedom, and health. The right are using a basic Nazi tactic here. Scapegoat a vulnerable minority. Oh, I said Nazi. Link longer talk on Godwin's law. You shouldn't never say Nazi. You should be sensitive to times when people are throwing that word around to derail a conversation. Okay, if everyone's a Nazi, no one's a Nazi. That's the video. When 40% of incoming students don't identify as the traditional labels, we could feel threatened. Or we could say, holy shit, we did a good job as graybeards, right? If you have gray in your hair and stuff, we did a good job. These young folks are free in a way us elders never were. And that is good. When your kids and your grandkids and their generation are freer than you, that's good. That's worth fighting for. That's worth dying for. While we're here, allow me to commend to you again Vicki Helgeson's Psychology of Gender textbook, which is a magnificent tour de force of the science and the history of science about gender in America, and Amazon link. It's a college textbook, and it doesn't have a bunch of pictures. You know, it's not glossy. It's a hardcore science textbook. Buy it and read it. See also series on sex and gender, Godwin's Law, How to Equivocate. Linky doos. Okay, thanks. I've been the Black Pill, you've been you.